Hi everyone, welcome back to another Reading with Raptors here on a wonderful Tuesday here at the University of Minnesota Raptor Center. I am outside, so we might hear some ambient noises. I don't know if you can hear the other great horned owl across the way who is currently vocalizing, but right now I am in here in the enclosure with one of our other resident great horned owls that we call Samantha. She is currently... It was very quiet out here until I started talking, so hopefully you can all still hear me pretty well. The bald eagles are also making quite a ruckus over there. So I figured we'd get some wonderful ambient sounds. But Samantha here is one of our oldest resident birds. She's been living with us here at the Raptor Center for about 28 years at this point. So we're unsure exactly how old she is. She came in already as an adult bird, maybe only 2 or 3, might be a little bit older than that, so we know she's at least 29 years old or so. So still a little bit of a mystery. Like I said, it was very quiet out here until I started talking, and then I think everyone had to make a little bit of noise. I know this great horned owl was also looking up, so there might also be some migrating birds passing overhead or something like that. So you might hear some other fun ambient noises as we go along. But today I have a couple things in store for us, hopefully. So we have our great horned owl here. You might also notice, or I'll try to angle the camera down a little bit, I do have one of our portable scales that we actually use to weigh her pretty frequently in her enclosure. So we might do a little training demonstration. And I also brought some fun kind of enrichment toys for her, so we'll see if she's interested in interacting with those a little bit later, because I do have some pieces of rat and a whole dead mouse for her. So I'll try to maneuver around so we can all see what she's up to. But I figured we'd start off with a pretty informative book just called Owls. It was written by Adrian Mason and illustrated by Nancy Gray Ogle. It's part of a Kids Can Press wildlife series. I really like this one. As always, I love having actual art in the books, and it has some really cool illustrated drawings. There's one in particular of an owl skull that I'm really excited to get to. So let's begin with owls. Maybe I can reorient myself here a little bit so you can still see her while I'm reading. So, owls. Owls are birds with large eyes, big round heads, and fluffy feathers. They glide silently through the sky with their long, wide wings. Owls are birds of prey, birds that hunt other animals for food. Birds of prey have hooked beaks and sharp claws to help them catch their food. Most owls rest during the day and hunt at night because they eat animals that are active at night. The smallest owl, the elf owl, would fit in the palm of your hand. The largest owl is the great gray owl. It is almost as tall as a kitchen counter. So this is the great gray owl, and this is the elf owl. And then an owl fact. Owls have eyes that face forward just like your eyes do. The eyes of most other birds are on the sides of their head. We're very lucky here in Minnesota. We can see great gray owls, especially in the winter, especially far north, whereas the elf owl is usually living much further west in kind of western, southwestern part of the United States. Kinds of owls. There are about 180 species of owls around the world. They belong to one of 2 groups, barn owls or typical owls. So this is our barn owl. Barn owls have heart-shaped faces, long legs, and light-colored feathers. There is only one species of barn owl in North America, and we call it, of course, the barn owl. Great horned owls, like this one. Most typical owls have a mix of brown, gray, black, and reddish feathers. This makes them look streaked. Typical owls have flat, wide faces. Some have tufts of feathers on their head that look like ears or horns. There are 18 types of typical owls in North America. Owl fact, Barn owls are sometimes called ghost owls because of their pale bodies. I think it might also have something to do with that call that barn owls make. I think we have an example. Our very first reading with raptors was with our barn owl, and she does make, I think, at least one vocalization in there that you can kind of see where they might get the name ghost owl. Where owls live. Owls live in forests, on prairies, in deserts and marshes, and even in cities. They stay where there is plenty of food and where there are places to rest and hide. Owls usually live alone or with one other owl, but some species live in larger groups. Many owls live in the same place all year. Some owls, such as the short-eared owl, move from one place to another as the seasons change to find food. This is called migrating. So some owls, such as the burrowing owl, live near fields. The long-eared owl and many other owls live in forests. Their streaked feathers help them hide in the trees. So you can see the long legs of this grassland owl and the streaky feathers of this forest owl help them with their camouflage. Here's a map of where owls live. So there's some overlap between where you might see the barn owl in yellow and blue, where you can find the great horned owl. So you can see the great horned owl lives a lot farther north than barn owls. So barn owls can live in barns or other buildings, but they also live in caves or holes in trees. Tiny elf owls live in the deserts. They sometimes find shelter inside cactus plants. You see the tiny owl inside the cactus? There's also a fun owl fact. A group of owls is called a parliament. Owl food. Owls wait quietly without moving until they see or hear their prey. Then they swoop down and grab the animal with their needle-sharp talons or claws. What an owl eats depends on the owl's size. Large owls eat mice and other rodents, birds, and even rabbits. Smaller owls also eat rodents and small birds, as well as insects, such as grasshoppers, moths, and beetles. Owls swallow small prey whole. If the prey is large, owls kill it with a bite to the neck. Then they tear the animal apart and eat the pieces. So this is a picture of a snowy owl. You can see those incredible sharp talons chasing after what looks to be like a lemming down here. Incredible. Owls can't digest all the parts of their prey. About 8 hours after eating, they will cough up a dry pellet. Inside the pellet are the fur, teeth, and bones of their last meal. And here's a fun fact. So here's a picture of a drawing of an owl pellet. You can see the bones with all the fur. And then a fun fact, in 1 year, a barn owl can catch 2,000 rats and mice. So that's so many rats and mice, keeping us from having way too many of those small animals running around. Very important service. Owl bodies. An owl's body is made for silent flying and hunting. This eastern screech owl is one type of typical owl. So their eyes. Large eyes help owls find food even in the dark. Special clear eyelids clean and protect their eyes. So you can see this special clear eyelid. The book doesn't say, but it's one of my favorite words. It's called a nictitating membrane. Nictitating membrane. It's a fun vocab word for everyone. Let's see if I can adjust here. We also have a beak. A short hooked beak is used to grip and kill prey. You can just see that hooked beak in there underneath those fluffy feathers. Their neck. Extra neck bones allow owls to twist their heads so far around that they can look over their backs. So here's a picture of those extra neck bones, those vertebrae. So we as mammals, we have 7 neck bones. Owls have 14. They have twice as many. Ear tufts. Ear tufts are bunches of feathers that are raised or lowered to show fear, anger, or excitement. They do not help owls hear, so they're not their ears. They're just feathers. Their ears, small ear slits, help owls locate their prey even when they can't see it. And I think the next page talks more about their ears. Feathers. Fluffy feathers next to their skin help owls keep warm. Large, strong outer wing feathers are for flying. So these small, fluffy feathers are for keeping warm. These long feathers are for flying. Their wings, they have long, wide wings that help them glide as they hunt. Their bones. Owls' bones are hollow. This makes their skeletons light for easier flying. And of course, their feet. You can see the picture of their feet. Strong toes with sharp talons are used to catch and hold prey. The outer toe can swivel around from front to back. This helps the owl keep a strong grip on squirming prey. Is she gonna move again? I'm trying to adjust so you can keep on seeing her. This is my favorite page in this book. How owls use sight and sound. Owls have keen sight and hearing to help them hunt even when it is dark. Owls have huge eyes that let in lots of light to help them see at night. Owls cannot move their eyes from side to side. Owls bob their heads up and down and from side to side to see better. Their flexible neck also helps owls see behind themselves. And here's the picture of the skull. So this is an owl's skull, and it's pointing out the ear openings. One's up high and one's down low. So owls can hear so well that they can even hear prey that is under leaves or snow. Some owls have one ear that is higher, larger, and points in a different direction from the other, so they can hear a sound in each ear at a slightly different time. This helps owls locate exactly where sounds are coming from. So if they're listening to something, maybe there's a mouse down here, the sound will hit this ear first and then this ear second, and the owl will know exactly where that food is. So this is a picture of a northern saw-whet owl. Looks like it's holding some sort of small mammal like a vole or a mouse. Owl fact, a great gray owl can hear a mouse under the snow from 30 meters or 100 feet away. Wow. So a great gray owl can hear something that far away even if it can't see it. How owls fly. Owls are strong flyers and can travel long distances, but most owl flights are short. Owls tend to stay in one territory or area, so they do not need to fly too far. Owls fly quietly to swoop silently down on their prey. Silent flying also allows owls to hear their prey while they are moving towards it. Owls will glide just above the ground so as they look and listen for food. Once a year, owls slowly lose and regrow their feathers. This is called molting. Molting replaces damaged feathers. So this is a picture of a boreal owl. See those nice strong feathers? So fluffy feathers down here to keep warm, and then these long flight feathers for doing that flying. The edges of an owl's wing feathers look like a comb. These spaces help muffle or quiet the sound of air moving over an owl's wings. You can see the fluffy edges. I actually brought one of our preserved small owl wings out, so you can take a look at that afterwards. Hopefully you'll be able to see these fluffy edges, so we'll try that out. And then an owl fact, it takes about 3 months for an owl to molt. So right now, I cleaned out all of the pile of feathers that Samantha here had molted already, but I'm sure she still has to molt a ton more. So it'll probably take most of the summer, the rest of the spring and all of the summer to kind of replace all those hundreds of feathers that she has. So right now we are in the thick of owl molting season. Owl nests. Owls do not build nests. Instead, they lay their eggs in a hole in a tree, on a cliff, or just on the ground. Some owls use the old nests of crows or other large birds. Barn owls nest in barns or other buildings. One species of owl, the burrowing owl, lays its eggs in holes in the ground made by tortoises or prairie dogs. Owls nest where there is lots of food nearby. Once a pair of owls has chosen their nesting site, they let other owls know. They claim their territory by hooting, screeching, or whistling. Sometimes owls will attack intruders that come into their territory. So here's a picture of a snowy owl sitting on, it's just kind of a flat, kind of raised area in the ground in the open tundra, and you can see it sitting on top of its eggs here, but it doesn't really look like much of a nest that we usually think of. That's a snowy owl. An owl fact. Some owls will lay more than 10 eggs in a nest. That is a lot of eggs to take care of all at once. Baby owls. Most mother owls lay 3 or 4 round white eggs in the spring. The mother owl sits on the eggs to keep them warm. The father protects the nest and brings food to the female. The eggs take about 30 days to hatch. The mother owl lays 1 egg at a time, waiting a day or so in between so the eggs do not all hatch at once. When a baby owl is ready to hatch, it uses a tiny egg tooth on its beak to chip open the eggshell. Baby owls are called owlets. Owlets are born with their eyes closed. They are weak and helpless. The first baby to hatch will usually grow more quickly than its brothers and sisters. It will get the most food and attention from its parents. The last baby to hatch might starve because it does not get as much food. It's kind of an insurance policy for owls. So this is a barn owl and it's owlets. You can see all the different ages. You have the kind of 2 larger ones in the middle and then some small ones on the side. You can see they're very, very fluffy, still growing in those feathers. Owl fact. In years when there is a lot of food in an owl's territory, more owlets survive. How owls grow and learn. At first, owlets stay with their mother in the nest while their father brings them food. The parents tear the food into small pieces for the owlets. The owlets grow quickly, and soon the mother also needs to leave the nest to help catch food for them. Owlets first grow fluffy feathers called down to keep them warm. When the owlets are about 3 weeks old, longer feathers begin to grow. As they get older and larger, the owlets will hop away from the nest to stretch and flap their wings. Parents teach the owlets to fly by tempting them out of the nest with food. When they are about a month old, the owlets begin to practice flying and hunting, but they still need their parents' help to find enough food. In late summer or fall, the owlets leave their parents to find their own territories. So you can see these baby owls kind of sitting out on a branch outside of their nest area. These ones are great horned owlets. So you can see them kind of stretching their wings, getting ready. When owls are as young as 1 year old, they will use hoots, whistles, and other calls to attract a mate. Owls grow up a lot faster than humans do, huh? Leaving the nest at only a couple of months old takes us a little bit longer. I gotta stretch my leg out, sorry. How owls protect themselves. Adult owls have few predators, but they must defend their owlets and feeding territories from other owls and birds of prey. Owls use hoots, whistles, and screams to warn unwanted visitors away from their territories. They will also attack with their sharp talons. Owlets and adult owls make themselves look larger if an enemy comes too close. They open their wings, puff up their feathers, snap their beaks, and hiss. The color and shape of owls makes them difficult to see. During the day, an owl keeps its feathers close to its body so that it is hidden in the forest. At night, the owl relaxes and puffs out its feathers. So this is a short-eared owl. You can see it defending its nest and its babies. So they puff out their feathers and raise up their wings. It makes them look huge. There's also a picture here up close of pygmy owls. Pygmy owls have two dark patches, or false eyes, on the back of their head. False eyes make these tiny owls seem larger and scare enemies away. Do you see how that kind of looks like eyes on the backs of their heads? Might not look very convincing to us, but to a larger owl or something like a fox, that might just be enough of a pause to let that owl escape. Owls and people. Many owls live near people, but sometimes the actions of humans hurt owls. In the past, people often shot owls because they thought owls were pests. Chemicals used on fields also poisoned mice and other owl food. The poisoned food harmed the owls and their young. It made the owls' eggs soft, so the shells cracked before it was time for the owlets to hatch. The poisons could also kill the adult owls. Today, the main threat to owls is the loss of their habitat, the places where owls live. Forests are cut down and cities are built over meadows and marshes. It is hard for owls to survive without enough space to find food and to nest. Owls help people by controlling the numbers of mice, rats, and insects. Many people know this and are trying to help owls by putting up special boxes where owls can hide and nest. Other people are working to protect owl habitat. So here's a picture of a barn owl with an artificial nest box, there we go, an artificial nest box up high in a tree for them to nest in. And here's an owl fact. Burrowing owls and spotted owls are endangered species, and they are endangered because they are losing their habitat. So the habitat is very important for these owls. Here are some pictures of some different owls of the world, in case you don't know a lot of owls that live in places other than here in Minnesota or wherever you are at. So here are owls live on every continent in the world except for Antarctica. Here are just a few types of owls. So in Africa, I'm trying to frame this well so I can still see. We have the pearl-spotted owl and the white-faced Scops owl. You know, the white-faced Scops owl is one I often see at places like zoos or other kind of sanctuaries. In Asia, you have the colored Scops owl or the fish owl. Fish owl is one of the largest owls in the world. In Australia, you can find a relative of the barn owl called the Australian masked owl. You can see that heart-shaped face. You can also find the barking owl. I wonder what kind of noise the barking owl makes. In Europe, you can see the eagle owl, another one of the largest owls in the world, as well as the barn owl. In North America, far up north, we have the boreal owl. Out west, we have the northern pygmy owl and the northern hawk owl. If you're in northern Minnesota or up in Canada and Alaska, you might see the northern hawk owl out during the day. And in South America, we have the black-capped screech owl, small owl with that very festive black cap. And then a spectacled owl. This is one I think I see a lot of times too, the spectacled owl, at other places like zoos or bird shows, places like that. They have that wonderful kind of white patch around their eyes. Ooh, few more notes. Owl signs. Since owls are often out at night, it can be difficult to see them. It is usually easier to hear their hoots, screeches, and whistles. The trick to finding owls is to know where they live. People look for owls where there are lots of mice or other types of owl food. Owls can also be found by looking for piles of their pellets. Pellets are dropped below an owl's nest or perch. Some people can imitate the call of an owl, or they might use a tape recorder to play an owl's call. If an owl is nearby, it might call back. The owl thinks there is another owl in its territory. If you've ever had the experience or ever get the experience of visiting a saw-whet owl banding station, this is usually how they attract those tiny owls on their migration to fly into nets so they can be kind of checked out and given a band for scientific research, is they'll play the tiny little call of a northern saw-whet owl. And that attracts all the others. Here's a few words to remind us of to finish us off. So a bird of prey is a bird with a hooked beak and talons that hunts other animals for its food. An egg tooth is a sharp piece on an owlet's beak used for pecking out of its shell. So after it hatches out, that tiny little egg tooth will pop part of its beak. An endangered species is a species that has so few animals left that the species might not survive. So it's pretty serious business. A habitat is the place where an animal lives. To migrate means to travel from one place to another. Molting means to lose old feathers that are replaced by new ones. An owlet is a baby owl. A pellet is a dry packet of fur and bones that is coughed up by an owl after. Go. Sorry, there was a moment where it gave me the little low network connection alert, so I'll give it a second to make sure it's all good. So we saw the talons, and then the territory is the area where an animal lives that the animal defends from intruders. I believe that is all after we've reviewed our terms. Yes. So that was Owls by Adrian Mason and illustrated by Nancy Gray Ogle. So that was a lot of really good information about owls. I did want to show you, I brought out, so this was a wing from an eastern screech owl, which is actually a pretty common kind of owl that we have here in Minnesota and really across most of North America, even though most people don't get to see them. They're pretty tiny and they have excellent camouflage, so they're usually really hard to find. But I wanted to see if I could show you. You can see the fluffy ends of the feathers, and then let me see if I can try to get the camera to focus on it. Okay, yeah, maybe you can see there's like a comb-like structure on the ends of these feathers. Kind of tricky to see. I'll try to get a good picture and maybe post it afterwards. The lighting out here isn't quite the best, but on the edges of these feathers, it almost looks like eyelashes, I think, the way that the feathers kind of come up. You can see these fluffy, soft endings of the feathers here. So all of this allows for that when this owl is flying through the air, this will help to break up that wind and that air resistance, so that way these owls can fly almost silently. So if you took one of these feathers, you can actually put it under a microscope, and you can see the tiny little structures that hold all the feathers together. So owls have this extra fluffy layer on top of the feathers that also helps to kind of break up that resistance, helps them give them that very quiet flight. So they're very, very quiet. I'm gonna scroll through and see if there were any questions while we were reading. Otherwise we can talk a little bit about our great horned owl here that we call Samantha. She's been kind of sitting in the background. I know there's been a couple of planes and things flying overhead, probably some migrating birds too. So usually when birds are either making some noise or kind of looking up, it's usually because there's something interesting up in the sky above us here on our Twin Cities campus. I see a lot of big owl fans. You know, and hopefully the connection has been okay. I tested this out yesterday because we are outside, so we're a little bit far away from the building. So hopefully, I know somebody said that their computer was a little bit skippy. Hopefully this has worked out well for most of the rest of us. Thank you for all of the Hatch Day wishes. That's very sweet of you. Any questions about owls? Anybody? If you have any questions, put them in the chat. What I think I want to do is I have that scale. I'm going to see if I can adjust the camera a little bit here and maybe angle this down a little way so you can see. And then I'm going to see if Samantha here is interested in showing some of the training that she does. So normally, how we weigh this bird, and we try to weigh her usually every day or pretty frequently, is we usually use this kind of mobile scale. It's actually really similar to I think it's a food scale that measures in small enough increments that we use. We use grams to weigh all of our birds, so really, really, really tiny measurements. So we found a food scale that works really well for weighing birds of this size. Ooh, before I walk over there, how fast can an owl fly? The answer is usually not very fast, especially compared to our other raptors or a lot of other birds. Owls, because of those fluffy feathers, they're really quiet, but in order to be really quiet, you have to sacrifice a little bit of speed. So that wind, that kind of lack of the breaking up of that wind resistance kind of slows them down a little bit. So normally something like a great horned owl, you might see them flying around like 25 or 30 miles an hour would be pretty much the fastest that you would see. They're usually not very fast. And usually they're flying in really kind of short little swoops. So if you think of, so if we have our wing here, this is kind of the front edge of it. Instead of flapping and flapping and flapping and flapping and flapping, they're usually kind of starting off and swooping down. So that way they can be really quiet. So not the fastest birds, definitely. Usually doing those kind of slow swoops. Oh, some other good questions. Okay, I'll answer some questions and then we'll try to weigh her. Oh, someone wants to know, Finn wants to know how he can do what I do when he gets older. So there are a lot of different ways to kind of end up working with animals. I went to the University of Minnesota and have a Bachelor's of Science in Biology. So I always thought that animals were so interesting. So I really wanted to study more about them and kind of how animals and plants and other types of creatures live out in the wild, how all of the environment kind of works together, how all of the habitats connect, and how those animals have changed over time. So that's what I've always been really interested in. So I went to the University of Minnesota to study biology, and while I was at the university, I actually started volunteering here at the Raptor Center just a bit ago. And so while I was volunteering here, I kept being more and more interested, kind of changed what I thought I wanted to do, and kind of changed it more to wanting to work more directly with animals instead of just kind of researching about them. I wanted to be able to learn how to work with them and train them, how the best way to kind of keep them safe and healthy in a place where they're going to be living for the rest of their lives. I just thought that was really interesting. So I'm always a big fan of telling people that volunteering is actually a really important thing to do, especially with the animal field. It'll help you figure out, even if you don't want anything to do with animals, volunteering a lot, especially when you're, even starting when you're really young, but especially as you go into junior high and high school, and if you go to college, all of that could really help you figure out what you really want to do, and kind of what things interest you and what you find kind of interesting and fun. It also is a great way to kind of make connections and interact more with people. So I work here now, all because of wanting to start volunteering almost 10 years ago, which I thought was pretty cool. So I'm a big fan of telling people to volunteer, because there are a lot of different ways you can end up working with animals and a lot of different degrees and schools you can go to. But I think volunteering is one of the biggest things. So keep that in mind, Finn, as you kind of go out into the world and is looking for opportunities to try something new to volunteer. Why are owl beaks so tiny? Here's the thing. Owl beaks are not that tiny. So owls, even though her beak looks teeny, teeny tiny, it's because it's hiding. So she has a huge beak, but it's all underneath those fluffy feathers. So owls have these big, long feathers kind of on the sides of their beaks, so they kind of look like this. And so those little feathers on the sides of their beaks are called bristle feathers. And if you've ever seen a cat kind of maneuver through somewhere kind of dark or kind of narrow, they're using those whiskers on their face to kind of feel where things are. Owls kind of have whiskers on their faces, but they're made out of feathers instead of hair. So those bristle feathers can help them kind of feel where things are. Because their eyes are so big and they can't cross their eyes, they have to kind of, they can't really see things that get too close to their face. So sometimes what you might actually see once I hand her a piece of food is she'll kind of lean back from it to try to see it, and then she can lean in to try to pick it up. So her beak is not actually tiny. Her feathers around her beak are just really long. I know, it's always kind of surprising when you see them open up their mouths and they have this huge beak, but it's just hiding underneath those feathers. Oh, someone was asking, has the owl population been growing or diminishing in Minnesota? That's a really good question too, and a little bit of a complicated answer, because for some owls, we've been seeing their numbers kind of stay the same or even increase as time goes on, and as we expand out a lot of cities and other kind of urban areas and our suburbs. Some owls do really well with that kind of habitat. For example, great horned owls or our eastern screech owls. Even a decent number of our barred owls. They can do quite well in the kinds of places that people tend to build over time. So you can have great horned owls living in the city. You can have your eastern screech owls living in the suburbs. We've got some nice trees. We've got open spaces for them to hunt. It works out really well. The numbers that are a little bit more concerning, that we're keeping a much closer eye on, are birds that have a lot more kind of specific habitat needs. So something like a boreal owl that lives in the middle of our old forests really far north in Minnesota, as we maybe cut down some of those forests, it reduces the amount of area, just doing some preening behind me, it reduces the amount of area that those owls have to live. The other major one are owls that live in grassland areas, like our short-eared owls. I mean, around the world, our areas of prairie and grassland are shrinking over time, because those are also areas that are really easy to develop for human use. So things like building highways through open grasslands and then expanding out our towns and cities. All of those things are going to reduce the amount of grassland and kind of reduce the number of kind of prey or food species and plant species that can live there. So over time, usually our prairie species are another one that is definitely of concern over time. So those are ones to kind of keep an eye out for. Doing some very intense scratching. Owls, like other raptors, have a special kind of extra ridge on their talon, on kind of what kind of looks like their middle talon. It's kind of the third one in. And so when she's scratching, she's kind of using that one particular talon to scratch. Because it's got kind of a built-in kind of ridge there that helps to help preen her feathers. How long does it take for great horned owl eggs to hatch? For most owls, it's about a month from when they lay their eggs to when those eggs hatch. And like we were talking about in our book, usually the eggs are kind of laid with kind of a day and then a couple of days. So one will hatch and then a day or two will pass and then another one will hatch and then a day or two will pass and then another one will hatch. Same thing happens when they're laying. They'll lay one, wait a day or two, lay another one, wait a day or two, kind of depending on the species. But that way, you don't lay all your eggs at once and then have all the babies hatch at once. You get them a little bit more spread out. And how long does it take for an owl pellet to form? Usually takes about 8 to 12 hours, kind of depending on the size of the food, depending on kind of what the food was, if it had lots of bones or lots of fur or kind of how tough it was to digest, how intact it was, all that can kind of affect it. But usually about 8 to 12 hours or so. So the food that she's gonna get this morning, she'll finish processing by sometime kind of at the end of the day, so she'll probably cast a pellet sometime during the night. These are really good questions. How long are her legs? I know there's been an image on the internet of somebody kind of holding up the feathers on an owl so you can see those super long legs. And people keep sending it to me because they're so surprised by how long owls' legs are. This is true for all birds. Birds' legs are a lot longer than you think, I promise. Unlike our hips, which kind of connect, our legs connect to our pelvis or our hips on the sides of our body, birds' legs kind of connect way back towards their back. So instead of being like a ball and socket joint, like if this is our hip and this is our long leg bone, they kind of sit in a socket. Birds, it's more like a shelf of kind of the back of their body and then their hip, and it kind of sits in there like a little shelf. So bird legs are actually really, really long. So yes, her legs are quite long. I think if we kind of like straighten them all the way out, goodness, her legs would probably be like a foot long or so, maybe longer, about a foot maybe. So normally, the example that I like to use is if you think of something like a flamingo. If you think of a flamingo's legs, you're probably thinking, oh yeah, flamingos, their knees bend backwards. But they don't. Their knees bend the same way that our knees bend. The joint that you're seeing that we think looks like knees is actually their ankle joint. So if you think about a bird's legs, they have really, 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 really long feet and ankles, and kind of shorter upper legs. So yeah, birds' legs are very, very long. Oh, a very good question. One that's very near and dear to my heart. Very quiet owl hooting. can you have an owl pet? There's a couple of answers to that one. Here in the United States and across all of North America, you cannot. So all owls are protected by our Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which means that even we have to have some very special particular permits from both the US government and the Minnesota state government to let us keep these birds. And even then we're only doing, we're specifically either helping birds that are sick or injured that need help and then will be released, or they're birds that we know would have a really hard time surviving in the wild and are going to be trained to be educators, so that they're gonna educate people. They have a very particular job. There are some places that will have permits for owls to be used for falconry, so a sport where you can hunt with raptors. They're not usually very commonly used for falconry, mostly because they're mainly hunting during the nighttime. Their hunting style doesn't quite work with the general falconry gist, but I know there are some folks out there using some kinds of owls for that. But even then, those owls still have a very important job and are really closely regulated by the state and the federal government to make sure that everyone is staying safe and that those owls have a very important job. There are other places in the world where people do keep owls as pets. I will say though that owls, I don't think they make very good pets anyway. They are nocturnal, most of them, so they're gonna be awake at night. They need to eat a lot of food. Earlier we were saying that a barn owl who only weighs about a pound, they might eat 2,000 mice or rats in a year. That is a lot of food. And I have a gross fact for you. These owls, they have to go to the bathroom every 10 or 15 minutes. That is a lot of mess to clean up. So owls are very noisy, they're very messy, and they're not really social either. If you're thinking about a bird for a pet, best kind of birds are ones that are more social. So there are things like our domesticated chickens or pigeons, great bird pets, really well suited to living in captivity. Owls, usually for just kind of need very specialized care and important job to do. So yeah, really good question. So what I'm gonna do, since she's on her scale, I figured I'm gonna give you, I wanna show you that kind of training that she does. So the very careful kind of training that we do with our birds. Sorry, I have my knee bent weirdly. There we go. So she's on her scale right now. So I'm just gonna ask her, falling over. I'm just gonna ask her to come over here to this perch real quick. So she has the scale here. I don't even know if you can even see me. So she's on this perch, and the way that I can ask her, hey, if you go to this perch right now, then you're going to get a delicious piece of rat, is I will kind of double tap on it, and if she goes there, then she's gonna get a nice piece of rat. So she's trained to be able to do that. I'll see if I can, maybe at the end, I'll see if I can hand her a whole mouse. I think I want the camera to be a little bit closer for that. See if I can ask her to come over to this far one too. Maybe this will be a little bit better for seeing. Over here. So she knows that, hey, if there's a double tap on a perch with the forceps, then she knows, hey, if I go over to that perch right away, I am gonna get something delicious. So I'm gonna hand her a whole dead mouse so we can watch her deal with that whole mouse. I think usually it's pretty good. It's a pretty big mouse, so you have been warned. Here is a whole dead mouse. So we'll see what she does with it. Oh, some fun noises. So this one's large enough she might rip it up, or we'll see if she maybe is interested in just swallowing it whole. She might also be looking around for somewhere to do what's called caching, which is a very fun, a very interesting natural behavior that we see from some of our birds, where they get a decent amount of food here. They get a very particular amount of food based off of their weight and the time of year and the amount of activity and the temperatures, all of that to make sure that they stay at a very nice healthy weight for living in a place like this for the rest of their lives. We want to make sure that we're keeping them as healthy as possible. But if she goes, you know, it's kind of early in the day, maybe I want to save this mouse for later, she might do something called caching. C-A-C-H. C-A-C-H-E, cache, where she might kind of take the food and hide it somewhere. So normally out in the wild, this would be like if you're a great horned owl and you caught a whole rabbit, you might eat half of it, but then you might take some of it and go stash it inside of a hole in a dead tree somewhere, so you can go and find it later. So we'll see if she wants to do anything with that. So really good, some really excellent questions. Can an owl be dangerous? It's a really good question. I think it depends on your perspective. If you're a mouse, absolutely. If you're a human, not usually. Usually the main problems that people have with owls is if there is a nest really close by and people, or the owl perceives that the people might be a threat to its nesting site, then you might get an owl trying to defend its territory. But normally for people, and even most of our animals that we might keep, it's usually not a big deal. Sometimes you will get owls learning to hunt some animals that people might be keeping, especially our smaller animals. But really, if you want to take a guess, actually, everyone take a moment and think about how much this owl might weigh. Oh, she's also going to work on maybe swallowing that mouse. Take a moment and watch her swallow the mouse too. Right now she's crunching on the head. Make sure it's a little bit easier to swallow. So this owl, she is one of the larger owls that you would see here in Minnesota. She's from far northern Minnesota. So she is about 4 pounds, so about 1,800 grams, about 4 pounds or so. So she's one of the largest owls that you'd see here. They can only carry about half of their weight. So they can only carry off about 2 pounds. So as long as you weigh more than 2 pounds, you should be pretty okay. She might rip up the mouse too. It's a pretty big mouse today. Do many species live in the same woods? It's a really good question. So you might get a couple different kinds of owl, especially you might have something like a great horned owl living near kind of the edges of a park. But then further in that park, you might have a nice wetland area where you have a barred owl, who's another pretty large owl here in Minnesota. So because those owls, they're both kind of larger owls, they might have a little bit of overlap in the kind of animals that they hunt, but they're hunting at different times of the night. So you have great horned owls hunting kind of at sunrise and sunset, and you have barred owls hunting in the middle of the night, like at midnight, 1 a.m. So you're gonna have 2 owls who are hunting in a little bit different areas and at different times. So they can kind of divide it up that way. So yeah, you might get different kinds of owls. You might also get a large owl like a great horned owl, and you might also have small owls like an eastern screech owl or a northern saw-whet also living in the same area. They're hunting totally different kinds of animals because they're so different in size. So that way they can kind of, we call it an environmental niche or niche. Just kind of think of like a very small little corner of the ecosystem that each kind of these owls can inhabit or live in. So they have different places that they can live, different animals they can hunt. So they can kind of fill different roles. I'm going to expand out this question. Okay. Do owls in captivity still live a mostly nocturnal lifestyle? Or since caregivers are there during the day, do they adjust to that pretty well? Yeah, so most owls that we keep here at the Raptor Center, they're mostly awake during the day. Here we go, we're finally swallowing that mouse. So they're usually awake during the day. Now, here's the thing. Normally when people think about animals being awake during the nighttime, they think, oh, they probably sleep during the day the same way that we sleep at night. And that's not really how most other animals sleep or deal with sleeping. Us going, passing out for 8 hours, sleeping with our eyes closed, laying down, that's really unusual for animals. Most other animals don't do that. Normally other animals kind of have to stay a little bit aware of what's going on around them. So normally during the day, an owl would spend a lot of time resting, maybe snoozing a little bit, but they're not really asleep like we think of being asleep. So they're still pretty kind of awake and aware all day and all night. Just kind of rest in between. So yeah, they adjust pretty well to, especially with some training, to eating during the day. That can be a little bit tricky, especially for some small owls, of eating kind of in the day in front of people or when people and noises are around. But definitely something that there's a little bit of teaching involved, but usually the birds adapt to it pretty well. Of kind of, you can tell that they get a little bit more active at night. I've mentioned probably a couple of times being here at night if I'm returning from a late night program somewhere far away. It'll be pretty noisy when I come back with the barn owl screeching and the great horned owls hooting. You can tell that the birds are the owls especially, are a little bit more active at night. They adapt pretty well to being kind of awake and aware during the day. A really good question. All right, so that was our Samantha, one of our resident great horned owls, eating a mouse. As we kind of leave off here, I'm gonna put a few pieces of rats. These are all kind of cut up because I didn't know how many I would want for this kind of presentation, but I'm gonna put them inside of this this is half of a dog toy. And I've got another half of one, because I personally really enjoy watching her try to figure out how to get the food out of these. If I, close-up camera. Yeah, actually, really good question. So these birds, we won't pet them or anything like that. Because these birds really aren't social, that's not something that they're really accustomed to. That's not something that they would really find comfortable or, I guess, enjoyable is maybe a more anthropomorphic way to put it. They probably wouldn't get much out of it, right? Might be especially kind of scary. Normally for these birds, if something's trying to touch them, it's usually something trying to catch them and eat them, right? So we want to make sure that she feels like she has plenty of space. However, I might try to kind of push this tripod down and put it a little bit closer so you can maybe see a little bit closer up her trying to get this food out of here. So I think I'm going to try to do that. This particular great horned owl also has, sorry, I'm trying to unplug my phone. She has some really wonderful colors. I'm so sorry for the shaky camera here for just a second. Well, that's not going to work. See if I can get a little bit closer. She has some really excellent colors. Because she is from really far up north, that camouflage, you tend to see those different colors. There, sorry, again, it's kind of shaky. I'm trying to get it so you can see her a little bit closer up while she comes down here to get this. Maybe I'll put it. Can you see that? Not quite. It's a little lever. There's a little lever in here. Having trouble disconnecting the phone from the tripod. Sorry again, everyone. So you can see, so I've got this little piece of, I've got this nice little piece of enrichment here. We've got our great horned owl there. So we'll see if she's interested in coming down. I was just moving around the tripod, so she might be like, that was kind of weird, that thing that you just did. So we'll see if she's interested in coming down at all. Otherwise, I might try to leave my phone out here and get a good video of her afterwards and see if we can post that on our page so you can see it. So otherwise, we'll see if she comes down here. Otherwise, I want to thank you all again for joining us for another session of Reading with Raptors here at the University of Minnesota Raptor Center. We hope everyone's kind of out enjoying the weather and staying safe and healthy out there. We will see you all again next week. And I will leave a little video here. I'll put it up in the comments here in a few minutes when she comes down to get this nice kind of enrichment toy. So thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your week.